Welcome to the Vintage Ballers Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Coreno. And on today's episode, we have former NBA All-Star Dana Barros joining us. Dana attended Boston College before playing 14 seasons in the NBA for teams such as Seattle, Boston, and Philadelphia. So without further ado, please welcome Dana Barros. Dana, I wanted to, I really appreciate you taking time to be on the show. And, the purpose of me starting this was really to kind of talk about people's careers and go over their careers and what the game of basketball meant to them. And, with you are someone I grew up with. So I'm 37, and back in the 90s, I was a kid. I was 10, 12, 15 years old. So the NBA in that era with my generation was huge. I mean, it is today, obviously. It's international now, but your generation was really big with my generation because I think the 80s and 90s was the first time the NBA kind of broke out and was really like a mainstream type of deal. Bird, Jordan, Magic obviously started in the 80s and it just progressed in the 90s. Definitely. So players like Dana Barros, everyone in my generation knows who you are because everyone watched the NBA back then. We all knew the All-Stars. There was no internet back then. So it was all about collecting cards and jerseys. And, so I was texting a few of my buddies, you're going to be on the show. And the first thing they say is, oh man, that guy could shoot. Everyone remembers the players back then. It was just a big, I feel like sports in that era, especially, basketball and college basketball, I think was a little bit different back then because people stayed longer. People stayed 3-4 years, and it was just a different culture. And today, I still love the game of basketball today. I'm a huge Cavs fan, and I still watch a lot. But I have a special place in my heart for the 90s for multiple reasons. So anyways, I appreciate you being on the show, having grown up with watching you. So
that's a pleasure to be here, man. It's a pleasure to be here.
So take us back to your youth, Boston area. And when did you really fall in love with the game of basketball, Dana?
Wow. My parents were 16 when they had me. So I remember being like 2-3 years old, going to my dad's junior college game. And this rinky-dink, terrible gym. It was only like 8 people in the stands, you know what I mean? But for some reason, I was just watching my dad run up and down this court. And it just intrigued me. And they brought me out in the warm-up line. They had this big, like, 6'11" dude on their team. And they gave me the ball, and they let me dunk the ball. And I remember holding on to the rim and being scared to let go because I didn't realize the hoop was that high when they actually dunked it. It was traumatic, but for some reason, it just stuck with me, bro.
Did you, growing up in Boston, were you a Celtics fan, I take it, or did you have another team that you liked?
Always loved the Celtics, but my favorite player growing up was Gus Williams for some reason from Seattle.
Oh, yeah.
And he played on the most furthest away team from Boston as possible. I could hardly ever see him because we had no internet and no cable and stuff back then. So I really had to watch tape-delayed games of him during the playoffs and stuff like that. That's really the only time I got to see him. So like you mentioned earlier, where fans and players really stuck together, it was that's my dog barking. Back then, you had to follow your team. Like, there was no internet. You had to really go out and search out and follow those teams and those players, So, come here. So, yeah, it's difficult.
Did you have, so Gus Williams is your favorite player. What about Celtics? Do you have any favorite player on the Celtics back then?
Larry Bird obviously was just an unbelievable player, just a great player. But Michael Jordan was my favorite player, like everyone else. So I had DJ, please. Michael Jordan was he was my favorite player. So I just like everyone else, I was a fan,
Did you, when you went to high school, when did you realize that you could play major college basketball and even beyond that? Like, what age were you?
Wow, I would say when I was a senior in high school, I averaged 39 points a game. And then in the state tournament, I averaged like 55 points a game.
Oh, wow.
And I never really had confidence like that. I just remember being on the court, understanding that it was my game. And that was the first time when I really realized, okay, I want to go play in the Big East. And I was willing to go play football 1 year at BC just to be able to have the opportunity to do that. And that was the best way I felt I could challenge my skills. So I just pursued that avenue of trying to get to the Big East whatever way I could, because that was, to me, that was semi-pro basketball.
Oh yeah. And back then, especially, I mean, you had that Big East was loaded, and it just that conference when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s was, I mean, it was a powerhouse. You mentioned football. I didn't know much about your football career. What did you play?
I was safety and receiver. I was top 50 player, D-back in the country. I took a
Really?
visit. Yeah, took visits. I had Miami, UCLA, all Notre Dame, all these. I could have went anywhere I wanted, but I never practiced football one day in my life. I just ran a 4.3 40, and I had a 43-inch vertical, and I would just tell the quarterback, throw it up. You know what I mean? So on my visits, I took 2 football visits to BC. I got to hang out with Doug Flutie, and I started realizing D-backs were like 25, 30 pounds heavier than me. You know, I'm like, damn, I don't know if this is really what I want to do just to get to the Big East. But on the last day of signing, a kid left the basketball team. So the BC basketball team called me and offered me a basketball scholarship. Otherwise, I was going to sign on football that same day.
That's interesting. I never knew that you had that football resume as well. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually watching football right now. I love football more. I can hardly watch basketball, man. I love football. I watch any college football game in terms of that. But I love playing basketball. You know, I didn't like football when it got cold, and then I realized the college players were just as fast as me and bigger. I didn't think that was a good matchup. You know what I mean? So I played my percentages. I think I played them right.
Yeah, I think you did pretty well for yourself. It's interesting. I was watching the documentary Iverson on Allen, and I forgot how great of a quarterback he was in high school. I mean, he was phenomenal. And obviously, some people think he could have been a great NFL quarterback as well, and we'll never know. But it's interesting, a lot of the crossover. LeBron was a heck of a receiver, and I grew up, 45 minutes from LeBron, and he was an all-state receiver. So, right. It's always interesting. So BC, was that always your first, choice because of where you grew up, or was it more just a Big East thing, or why did you choose BC?
Big East. I think the only other basketball scholarships I received was Jim Calhoun was at Northeastern. And I think Al Skinner was at URI. Every other school was like D2, D3. Again, no internet, nothing like that. So, I mean, everyone just thought I was going to play football. I was like top 50 football player in the country. So I think a lot of people didn't really look at me in terms of basketball, and never even knew that I averaged 40 a game in high school.
Wow. When you got to BC for basketball, we're not that they were surprised, but were people around you who knew that you were so great at football surprised that you chose basketball?
No, because they were surprised that I was going to play football, I think, because the state tournament, the 4 games in the state tournament leading up to April, I averaged 55 points a game, and it elevated me from the 40 so I was coming off a natural high of all this attention, which I had never garnered in my whole career, and saying, no, I can do this. Like I was like steadfast saying, no, I can play basketball at this point. So I had a mission, whatever it took for me to get there, I was gonna make sure I got to play in that Big East no matter what happened. And BC was the only team really that even recruited me from that standpoint.
So who were some of the players you went up against in that era of the Big East?
Man, every team had I think 2 pro players. So at Syracuse had Sherman Douglas, Derek Coleman, Ronnie Sully, Billy, yep. Stephen Thompson. And I even played Raphael Addison might have played in the league a couple of years. So yeah. They had 6 guys in my 4 years that played in the league. Connecticut, Uncle Cliffy, Chris Smith. Providence had Billy Donovan, Marty Conlon. And they were one of the top-ranked teams that had the least amount of talent, So, and then Georgetown had Mutombo and Mourning and Reggie Williams. So it was, I could go down the list. St. John's had Mark Jackson, Shelton Jones, Jason Williams.
Wow.
Michael Porter. So every team, you name the team, they had 2 or 3 NBA players on it. So
absolutely
crazy.
Loaded. Yeah, that is crazy. Yeah. And those names, because my brother was a pretty good player back in the day, and this is back in the late 80s, early 90s, high school and college. So I was a little kid then, but I remember all these names because he would watch all the games. Any game that was on TV, and his buddies and him would always talk sports. So I remember guys like you when I was, 5, 6, 7 years old. So hearing all these names, the Reggie Williams of the world, the Marty Conlins, it's funny to go back in time and to hear some of these names. And of course, that I post a lot of these guys on my page. So right. The Big East, Dana, how did that prepare you for the physicality of the NBA?
I mean, even the NBA was so much different, and the Big East was such a physical conference, man. I mean, it was almost like pre-Bad Boys, you know what I mean? It was like bad. Like, it was like Georgetown had a reputation of thug life, you know what I mean? Like prison basketball, penitentiary ball, they used to call it, with the high tops and the Nikes and the camouflage warm-ups. And, the whole persona was what it was. So it prepared me in every way possible, because in that era there was a lot of man-to-man play, which helped me out a lot, but there was a lot of man-to-man physical play. No layup rules are in effect, you know what I mean, and things like that. So I got to play against 3 or 4 NBA players every night I stepped on the floor. So I don't think I could have went to any other place that would have prepared me better.
No, you're probably right. And looking at the end of your career, college-wise, is there any 1 or 2 memories that stick out to you from BC?
Just probably having like an 80-game streak or something like that in college as well. And then I had the same thing, a 79-game streak in the NBA. But the three-point line didn't come in. I didn't have it all through high school. It didn't come in until my sophomore year. So I really didn't start to master that shot. So by my senior year, I was probably one of the best three-point shooters in the country, where that shot was literally starting to take off in college, because Rick Pitino and Providence and these guys had this style that they were playing that really helped me out in terms of that shot. So I would say just a three-point shot my senior year elevated me, and also gave BC that fighter's chance every night. We beat a couple of top 10 teams, I think, my senior year, based on 7 or 8 or 9 threes in a game.
Wow. Now, Dana, based on your three-point legacy, you're known as one of the greatest three-point shooters in NBA history. When you look at a guy like Steph Curry, where do you rank him all time?
Steph's number 1 in my book.
That's what I think too.
I look at guys, and I hit a post. I posted a post where I hit a crazy buzzer beater over Reggie Miller, and I just tagged him, and I just said, "Over the great Reggie Miller," and he hit me back, and he was just like, "Oh, that was a great shot." And I say that because Reggie Miller, to me, would be Drazen Petrovic.
Yes.
Those two would be in any order, 2, 3.
Would you put Ray Allen?
Ray Allen, obviously Ray Allen. I'm sure there's a couple I'm missing. I would put myself in the top 10.
Oh, yeah. You're up there.
I look at shooting differently as a shooter, because I look at shooters as who can do every aspect of shooting. I don't look at a guy who can stand in the corner and just make standstill shots. That's still a shooter to me. But I'm talking about an all-around shooter who could pull up off the dribble, full speed off the dribble, come off a pick and roll right or left, come off a down pin, mid-range shots. You know what I mean? These are the shooters that I'm talking about, and that would be those guys in that category.
When you look at all those great shooters, Reggie, he was one of my favorite players growing up. And, I don't feel he ever, at least when I talked to some of my nephews, they didn't even know who he was. And I'm like, Reggie Miller he was really Steph Curry before Steph Curry when it comes to some clutch shooting. He had hit some of the biggest shots in playoff history back in those days, against MJ, against, the Knicks. We all know the infamous Spike Lee story. So, Reggie, I feel, he was, when I played basketball and I was younger, I kind of emulated my game after him, because he was just and he was a scrappy player on top of that. But, you played against and Drazen Petrovic. There you are. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
I don't know if that was me or you. I was still on, so I just stayed on just in case, so I didn't know.
I think it might have been me, but it's never happened before, so I was a little bit unsure. We have a pretty good connection here, so that's my bad. But I
want. No worries, bro. No worries, man. I'm chilling. Well,
I appreciate you staying on. So we were in the middle of talking about some of the shooters back then, Reggie, Drazen, and I had Kenny Anderson on the show recently, and he talked about Drazen, obviously, and what a loss that was. with him and Reggie Lewis and some of the guys we lost back in those days, and I want to go back obviously with you earlier when you got drafted by the Sonics, but talking about guys like that, how big of a loss was it for the NBA to lose a couple guys like that?
Well, I knew Reggie personally. We played a lot in the summertime together. We worked out, as well as Kyrie's father, Dedrick. He went to BU at the same time, so we always would challenge each other all summer, going around from gym to gym trying to find runs. So that was really personal to me. I knew his family, his wife, his kids. So definitely, especially after the Len Bias situation, it was just crushing for the whole city and for the organization. And it's just a tragedy, man. But it's just no different than life. People forget that it's just life. We're just playing a game, actually, and it's a job. And it replicates life in so many different ways. So it is what it is, and you just have to kind of count your blessings, and every day counts, You
really do. And back then, I remember being a little kid and hearing the news about both of them. I think it was around the same summer, '93, and I couldn't believe it because those are two rising stars in the NBA, and everybody knew who they were, obviously. And it just seemed like they're both good guys too. So it seemed like it was a devastating loss. And I know I've talked to a few of their ex-teammates who told me it was really, heartbreaking to lose both those guys. Right. So let's go back to 1989 draft night. Did you have any idea where you were going to go?
Well, I'm in Chicago the morning of the draft, and I'm told by Doug Collins and Jerry Krause, we're going to take you with the 21st or the 23rd pick. They had 2 picks, so I'm bugging. I'm just like, I get back to Boston like in the afternoon, and the draft is that night, and I'm telling everybody I'm going to play with Mike. He's my favorite player. I'm bugging. I'm totally bugging. I'd visited no other teams. That was the only team I visited. Never talked to anyone else. So I get to the draft. I'm just watching it with my friend. I'm not even paying attention. And David Stern says with the 16th pick, Seattle selects Donna Barriosi or something like that. I'm like, what the hell is that? So I'm bugging. I'm like, no, I don't want to go to Seattle. I'm like, bad. I'm like in a bad way about the draft, but I'm supposed to be celebrating being the 16th pick. And then Seattle picks me, and then Chicago picks B.J. Armstrong at 21. He ends up winning, I think, 3 or 4 rings. So, I'm always wear that on my shoulders like, damn, that could have been me. But I love Seattle, man. I got to play with Kemp, Gary Payton, and I had a great 4 years there. So it ended up being okay once I got there. But I was devastated, man, by Seattle picking me 16th and not going to Chicago. I was devastated.
Oh, I don't blame you, especially seeing how it turned out for them in the next, 4 or 5 years with BJ, like you said, winning back-to-back championships.
Definitely.
In Seattle, did Gary Payton and Sean obviously end up forming a nice, duo for quite a while out there. Did you know how special those 2 players were when you played with them back then, or was it something that you didn't see at the time?
Well, Sean and I came in together. I was 16th and he was 17th, so I knew Sean was special, absolutely. And then when Gary came in, I remember it was like the ping pong balls were bouncing, and we could have got 1 or 2, and I knew if we got 1, we were going to get Derek Coleman. And then I watched Gary in the tournament the preceding year in college in the NCAA tournament, and I said, oh, man, if we get this dude, I'm going to be in trouble, because we already had myself, Nate McMillan, Sedale Threet, Avery Johnson was there. We had a bunch of already, so I'm like, if we get the 2nd pick, somebody's gone, or somebody's going to get, be pushed out the mix. So I knew that once we drafted him, it was going to be a problem. And even though we started off slow his first 2 years and practice every day, he was an amazing defender and an unbelievable point guard. So I just knew that was going to be an issue after my 3rd. And then going into my 4th year, not really playing much, I actually went to the management in Seattle and told them, look, you just have to trade me. Like, I can't sit here. I got 1 more year on my deal. Not really sure what I can do. This guy's getting better every year. I just knew I wasn't going to play. So I basically went to management. I left at the end of the season. I just left and talked to anyone, didn't go to any of the meetings, and just basically, was traded that summer through my agent and just conversations of not wanting to come back, even though I liked it there,
And Seattle had so much talent in those years. I mean, really from the late 80s to the mid 90s. I mean, that was one of the teams that had just a slew of talent, you being one of them, obviously. And so you go from, I think, Seattle to Charlotte, correct? Was it Kendall Gill trade?
Kendall Gill. I was there for about 2 or 3 days, and when I first got traded, I ran out the house like, what is going on? Because I'm like, I'm going from Gary Payton to Muggsy Bogues. I'm not playing either way. And Muggsy Bogues was leading the league in assists and one of the best point guards in the league. You know, even though I was happy to go, I think it was Larry Johnson and Alonzo. They had a great team, but I'm like, I'm in Seattle had a great team as well. So then I realized it was a 3-way deal. I went to Philly, and then, you know, it was on and popping from there.
Yeah, I feel Philly is where you really made a name for yourself. I mean, I had known you back in the Seattle days, obviously, but like Philly is where you really broke out and became that 20-point per game scorer, you know, the 3-point. We always knew you could shoot threes, but to me, you really made a name for yourself in Philadelphia, All-Star 95, et cetera. That's when I was, probably 10, 11 years old, and that's when everyone started knowing who Dana Barros was. And that was, obviously pre-Iverson years. So those are the years where Philly, between Barkley and Iverson, they were searching for an identity. And I feel like you were one of the guys that gave them an identity back then. So, when you, on those teams, I think Spoon was on that team and with Sean Bradley on that team. So, at that time, I know the organization was kind of in limbo when they got rid of Sir Charles. What was your goal in Philadelphia? Were you trying to just, improve as a player, obviously, but were you trying to, organizationally, what were they trying to do at that time?
Well, I mean, when I first got to Philly, they had Johnny Dawkins, and I was kind of a throw-in, I think, on the deal. They just drafted Greg Graham,
yep.
I believe, the middle of the first round. And then, so I ended up playing a lot that year, averaging like 13 or 14 points a game. The coach leaves. John Lucas comes in. They draft another point guard, like I think a 9th or 10th pick in B.J. Armstrong. Maybe it was 18th or something like that. So same scenario every year. I'm ready to go to battle in the camp. And then B.J. gets hurt early in camp. And then Lucas basically just handed me the ball. Jeff Malone gets hurt. You know what I mean? And now he's like, all right, I'm going to need you to get 20. And this was like game 3 or 4 of the season. And then it just progressively got better from that point. I just, again, started building confidence, and I had to play point guard every day. So it was just blending all of it together in that one scenario. And that was my free agent year. So I was eating right, sleeping right. I wasn't going out. I wasn't eating red meat, all that, man. I was on my team, like on my square for real. It was, and then, like I said, it all came together. And then I really got hurt towards the end of that season. I started having back problems a little bit towards the end of that season, but I ended up making it through that season and became a free agent.
So when you became an all-star, that had to be an incredible feeling, seeing that what you had went through in Seattle and kind of, one of 4 or 5 point guards, to get to that point where you're averaging 20 points a game, 3-point contest, all-star. What was that like?
Crazy, because just being in that scenario just a year and a half earlier, where I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if I can play in this league. Everybody just wants me to shoot, but I really can dribble the ball as well. And just going through that whole scenario of not knowing and getting the opportunity and wanting it so bad, and then finally getting it and being able to get to that pinnacle was just more like a self-assuring pat on the back inside. I'm not a look at me person, but it was just like, I just knew it. I knew it. Like, it just was to me, to myself, saying, it paid off. It just, all the work paid off.
Did you, going into the free agency then, was Boston always your number one choice because it's your hometown, or was there another place you were looking at?
No, actually, I was actually in Washington about to sign with the I think they were the Bullets then.
Yep.
With Chris Webber, Juwan Howard. They had
Yep.
a great. So I'm in there. I'm like, okay, I'm about to sign a contract with them, and then I'm sitting with my agent, and we're going back from Washington to Philly, and I'm like, man, call ML and tell him I'm going to sign with the Wizards, and, he should have signed me. It's too late. So we kind of did it as just a joke, or like an afterthought. We called ML, and Mel's like, what, wait a minute, don't sign nothing. So we're like, whatever. We're just driving back. By the time we get back to Philly, I get on a plane, get to Boston. By the time I land in Boston that night, he's like, Mel made an offer, and it's like $5 million more than Washington. And I'm like, what? It was like totally out of left field and amazing to be able to come home and play. So it was an afterthought, and it was just came to fruition from that point on.
No, that's a really cool story. You guys had at that time was David Wesley on that team, I think. Eric
Man, we
Williams,
had 7 guards, man. We had David Wesley, D. Brown,
Rick
myself,
Fox,
Sherman Douglas was still there,
Sherman. Yep.
Todd Day, Greg Minor, Rick Fox. So we had those 1-2 combinations. We had 7 or 8 people playing that 1-2 combination.
Wow.
Or I played 1-2, so I had 7 or 8 people. Even though I signed as a free agent, it was just wild once I got there.
So when they drafted, Paul Pierce, did you, as an organization, I mean, obviously he ended up being a Hall of Famer, but at that time, nobody really knew how that would all go. And they had a lot of draft, I think, to draft Chauncey Billups back then. And there's a lot of guys they had. Did you know when you first saw Paul come in and Antoine Walker and those guys, how special those guys were?
I mean, I played with Antoine 2 years before that. He came in, I think, in 95 or 6. And then Paul came in the year after, or 2 years later. And both of those guys, I knew Antoine was unbelievable. I really loved playing with him. He was such a special forward point guard. You know what I mean? He was like him and Penny, like that time with Penny and Tracy McGrady and those guys were like those 6'9" point forwards. He was always overlooked to me because he was amazing. And then Paul came in, and he kind of fell into our lap. I think he was supposed to be an earlier pick in the draft for some reason. And Patino, I believe, wanted Dirk Nowitzki, but he was picked 9th. So we ended up getting Paul Pierce, and the fans, were ecstatic about that, I think, because he fell to us at that point. And I remember him coming in, like, watching him in Kansas, like, okay, he's a good player, real good player. Didn't really know how tall he was till he arrived. Like, damn, he's pretty big. And then I remember me and D. Brown were like, dude got a bad body. Like, he got like a weird jerky game. And I'm like, and then he took off on somebody. Like, whoa! Like I didn't know the athleticism was in that body like that. And just phenomenal, man. I mean, just got better every year. I played with him 3, maybe 4 years, and just got better every year from that point on. And they became a pretty good duo in the East.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you were there in the beginning of really that whole thing. I mean, because obviously they had a nice little run for a while, and then of course later on, KG and those guys come in and they win the championship. But you were really one of the guys that saw his progression when he was a rookie and beyond. Because back then when he got drafted, I didn't really think that he was going to be that. I mean, I knew he was a good player, but I didn't think he was going to be a Hall of Fame type talent. So that was, watching him, and I never realized how truly great he was. And obviously he ended up having a wonderful career, but. In those Boston days, give us a couple of your favorite memories.
Just the man, we had so many guys coming through there, but Paul and Eric Williams were my guys, and we hung out a lot. And one of the favorite memories was watching. I was actually playing in Detroit, and I came back, and I got to hang out in the locker room, even though I didn't play for the Celtics at this time. I was kind of in the locker room watching them make that 26-point comeback against the Nets, I think it was.
Yep.
And that energy in the building was amazing, man. And I just remember, like, the hair on the back of your neck standing up. And that was probably my best moment in just being in the Boston Garden, even though I wasn't on the court at that time. And then the other moment would be breaking the three-point record, breaking Michael Adams' three-point record of consecutive games in a row, winning a three-pointer at the Garden, making a three-pointer at the Garden. So those would probably be my two best moments being in a part of that organization.
Now, you were also most improved player in the NBA. Was it 95 as well?
Yes.
I mean, that's a heck of a testament. And not many people, I mean, obviously only one guy a year wins that. And what did you do in that I think it was 94, 95. Like, what did you do to get to that point? Was it just a matter of getting more playing time, or was it something that you tweaked in the offseason?
Well, I mean, I think it was a matter. I think the first year in Philly, I might have averaged, 12 points a game or something like that. So I think I went from 12 to 21 points a game. It might have been like the biggest, gap between, averages in that year. Also, I was 6th or 7th, top 5 or something in assists. Led the league in 3-point shooting that year. So it was just, man, it was just weird, man. Like, if you asked me to talk about, what was going on in my mind during that year, I couldn't tell you. If you asked me what was I thinking during the 50-point game, I couldn't tell you. It's almost like a zone type thing where athletes talk about where it just kind of happens automatically. You're on automatic. And that whole second year in Philly, that whole year was like on automatic. I remember playing 42 minutes a game, leading the league, and I don't remember being tired. You know what I mean? I watched myself on tape, and people would always say, "How come you never sweating?" You know what I mean? It was almost effortless the way everything came together, for me. It was weird.
Well, for some of the younger kids watching this, Dana shot 46.4% from three-point land that year. 46.4%. That's incredible. And you had the 50-point game. I think it was against Houston, wasn't it? Olajuwon and those guys. I mean, what was that like? Because Houston was a good defensive team. I think Jet and Vernon Maxwell, and then they were loaded. How did that come about? What was that like?
Well, again, we had a lot of injuries, and I remember scoring, I think, 41 against the Lakers maybe a week or two before that. And then I got to halftime, and I was in like 30 points, and we were losing. I mean, this was Akeem the Dream, and this was the championship years, and I'm like, damn, I'm going to try to get 40 again before the lead gets too high, and I'm going to come out the game. You know what I mean? I'm like, you're going to take me out the game, like, first 6 minutes into the third quarter, because we're going to be down 30. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, I got to get a quick 10. I need to get a quick 10 to 12 points. And, I was never a selfish player, so I was always in the flow of the game. But again, it just happened so quickly and effortlessly that Lukey was like, in the timeout at the end of the third, like, you're going to get 50 today. So he was like, no, you're going to get 50 today. And that the fans kind of stayed. There was nothing else left for them to stay but for that. So he just left me in the game. And from that point, from like 7 minutes on, if I had the ball like 48 feet from the basket, the fans would scream, "Shoot!" So I just loved the whole last 6 minute aspect of Houston not trying to let me get it and then me getting it. That whole situation was a pretty good thing to be a part of.
Oh, that's a heck of a memory. I mean, against that team too, which was one of the better defensive teams in the NBA with legends. I mean, like we were talking about Olajuwon and Ori and Mad Max and Kenny and so on and so forth. So that's got to be one of the highlights of your career. When you look back at your NBA career, what do you want? Especially the kids watching who didn't get to see you play in that era. What do you want them to know about Dana Barros' legacy?
Just that anything is doable, anything is possible, because I can't tell you how many times I've been told, bro, play football, you're too little, bro, bloody blah, blah. I can't tell you how many times. And if I wasn't that focused person, and they used to call me ball boy, and this is how you have to be almost weird to get to these situations and play in the NBA and be Bill Gates and to be these great people, because you're different than everyone else. Like, I'm not at the party, bro. I'm not drinking, bro. You know what I mean? So, and that's why they call me ball boy. Not because I was a ball boy, because every time they see me, I had a basketball in my hand. So it became ball boy was the joke. And then it was like, yo, that's that ball boy right there. You know what I mean? Like, the ball boy meaning changed from that standpoint. So I would just tell them, pick whatever you want to do. Especially in this age with the internet and being able to reach billions of people with your ideas, be yourself, brand yourself, and try to find something in life that you enjoy doing. I own a 5-court facility, the Dana Barros Basketball Club. I get up every day that I feel my body feels possible. I go to my 5-court facility, turn on all the lights, put on Dr. Dre channel or Jay-Z channel, and I play basketball by myself, just going court to court for like 45 minutes, 4 to 5 days a week.
I love that.
That's what I say to every kid. Do something like that you like to do. Don't pick basketball. Whatever you like to do, wake up every day and say, yeah, I'm about to go to work, have fun, and handle this business at the same time.
Now, when did you open that facility?
I opened a smaller one in 2006. Then I went to a little bit bigger one in 2012, and now I'm in a 5-court. So I started off at a 2, then I went to a 3-court facility, and then I went to a 5-court. So again, being able to brand your name and do what, use your NBA career and your basketball career to, make a living after basketball as well is another thing that young people should understand that, that's another thing that I would like to make them understand in branding yourself as well.
Oh, yes. So is that where I see you on your story? A lot of times you'll be in the gym shooting. Okay.
Yes, definitely. DanaBarros3.com. And you'll see me, and I do NBA moves, NBA videos. And a lot of times, just between me and you, a lot of times I'm in there working out because the high school kids talk so much, man. That I got to take off the hoodie like at least every 2 weeks and beat them down and just let them know. So that's why I stay in shape just for those moments, because those are priceless to young kids for them to see me teach one of the great high school kids a lesson. That's what I live for. That once or 2 weeks where the kid asks for that beat down.
I love it. I love that. Yeah, okay, I got a few more questions for you. Number one, toughest guy you ever had to face in the NBA?
Other than Muggsy Bogues, and I would only say Muggsy because I've never played against anyone who was as fast as me or faster than me, and that was the biggest humble pie that I ever had in my life, playing against that dude. But the most difficult guy to defend for me and like to watch him was Tim Hardaway Sr. Like he's one of the most underrated players to me because at 5'10", he could post up a 6'3" kick guy. He could get 30, but he averaged 11 assists because he played with Chris Mullin and Mitch Richmond. And he was just, man, he was unbelievable handle. He was just all around great guard, tough matchup, so, him and Allen Iverson the toughest.
I hear AI a lot. Tim is somebody I think is very underrated. I mean, the crossover, we all know the whole, everything about his game, but he never really gets mentioned in those point guard conversations. You hear Stockton, Peyton, all those guys, which they obviously deserve to be up there. But those like 90s point guard conversations, Tim doesn't always get mentioned. And I'm thinking he was easily one of the better point guards of that era. Mark Price, another one, Terrell Brandon. So yeah, I love giving a shout out to Tim because I was a big fan of his game as well. Even when he went to Miami and played with Zoe and those guys and then Thunder Dan and those guys, it was he had a great career.
Right. Definitely.
Okay, one more. As far as you offensively, who was the toughest guy on who guarded you during that era?
Oh, there weren't too many guys. Oh, I would say Sedale 3.
Really?
Oh my goodness! Like I was so used coming into the league. He was there when I came into the league, and coming into the league, I was so used to being the fastest guy. And even in the NBA, I was so used to being just never having a move, just catching the ball and going, and just being able to go around someone. And I remember the first time catching the ball and going and running into his chest, backing up and going the other way and running into his chest. And I just never met someone who wasn't fast, but had unbelievable anticipation. And he taught me how to beat him. Unknowingly, he taught me how to beat him because I heard him telling another guy, Derek McKee, in the locker room after he beat me one-on-one, how he beats me. And he says, Dana doesn't have a double move. If he had a double move, he would beat me every time. So once I heard that, then I started between the legs crossover, or I would double crossover. So up until that point, I never knew anyone with the anticipation and the defensive prowess of Sedale 3.
I love the Sedale shout out. That's and he had a nice career for I think almost 13, 14 years he played in the NBA. That's an interesting story. That's funny about.
My son went to school with my son.
Oh, really?
Boston. Yeah, which is crazy.
Wow.
Crazy. My son came home and was like, a friend of mine played with you. I was like, wow, just wow. The world is a place, man.
Yeah, that is. And I have a lot of family up in New England area, Boston, New Hampshire. Probably half my family lives up there, so they're all huge Celtics fan. They all know who you are. So I want to give them a quick shout out because they, I always told them any Celtic I have in the show, I'll give you a shout out. But they, like you, Boston sports are everything to them, and so it's pretty cool to have you on the show for that reason as well. So last question for you, Dana. What are you up to nowadays, and any final thoughts?
Well, I run my facility. And I do consulting for the Celtics. So I'm usually at every home game. I do a lot of skybox signings. I do a lot of corporate speaking. And I'll still maybe do 75 to 100 events with the Celtics Shamrock Foundation in the city, which I love to do, giving back to the community. So I do that, but I'm mostly retired, man. I'm home until my gym opens at 3:30. I'm pretty much home every day on YouTube, man, looking at conspiracies and, watching First Take and doing just relaxing, man, and enjoying, waiting for the kids to get out of school, and then I'm at the gym all day.
And that's what you should be doing, enjoying retirement and hanging out and enjoying your kids. That's what life's all about.
Definitely.
So I want to thank you for coming on the show, number one. And number two, down the line, I'm looking to do a segment with teammates. And I would love to have you come back on with maybe one or two guys, whether it's an Eric Williams or whoever you'd want to have on the show. Would love to do that and to talk about, some of the dynamics with a certain organization or team and how that went.
Definitely. E-Dub is my man. We played together, man. We have some Rick Pitino stories and stuff, man. We'll love to get down with E. And if you ever talk to him, tell him I don't have his Instagram or not. I got to look. I just got on Instagram, man, like 9 months ago. I'm way behind, man. My kid's been killing me for about 2 years, so I finally got on. So, once the podcast is, I got my DB3 podcast coming out this Friday. So once that comes out, Christmas Eve, I'm really going to get into this Instagram stuff and YouTube and try to blow this thing up and see what happens. So I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. Well, let me know if you need any, I could, as far as shouting you out or any help. I do a lot of, my nephew's the one that got me into this. I didn't know anything about it either. And it was
you do a great job. I just want to commend you on that. Salute.
I appreciate that, Dana. And it's funny because I didn't know anything about this 2 years ago. And he's like, hey, Uncle Brad, you should start this, page and something you're passionate about. And I was like, well, I love the 90s era basketball. Maybe I'll start a page on that, not thinking it would get to the point where it's gotten to. And, he kind of taught me the tricks of the trade, and I started posting. And then, of course, I just tell my story about each player. And, I have such a passion for that era. And then all of a sudden I started getting, a couple players following me, and then it became 10 players, then 20, then 30, then 40, et cetera. And that's when I said, hell, I'm going to start a podcast. Why not? So,
because you're old school, man. These young boys don't know nothing about no game. Man.
No.
You know how we are. You know how we are.
Well, it's cool because, like, a lot of my nephew's friends, a lot of the younger generation, my younger cousins who are in their teens and early 20s, love the show and the page because they're learning about these guys, and they're like, oh yeah, I remember hearing that name, or I didn't know who this guy was, or they know the sons, like Tim Hardaway Jr. They'll know the sons of these guys, and they're like, oh yeah, that's that guy's dad.
In the league right now, a lot of sons, amazing.
A ton of them, yeah. And I just had.
Technology saves us, because I'll tell you the first thing that happens when a kid says, Dana Barros, I'm speaking at a camp, and they're like, who's Dana Barros? Pick the phone up, bang, 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 50-point game comes up.
Exactly.
I'm automatically legitimized, you know what I mean? So
well, it's funny.
Technology sometimes.
It's cool because, like, one of my nephews actually talked about that 50-point game when I told him who you are. I'm like, you look him up, and he's like, oh my God, he scored 50 in a game. And I was like, yeah, I mean, that's a big time, a big deal. And it's interesting now that, like, with what I'm doing, I feel like I'm trying to illuminate what it was back then and how great of an era, the 80s, 90s, that whole era was. And, that, to me, that's basketball nowadays. We wouldn't have, it's obviously international now, but it wouldn't be like that if it wasn't for your era. And I think that's important for the young generation to understand that and understand how physical the game was back then, and how the 3-point shot, like you said, you didn't even have the 3-point shot in high school. I mean, that's today kids would think that's crazy, but back then it wasn't like that. I mean, guys like George Gervin and those guys and Pete Marriage, they weren't using the 3-point shot. So
it was 81 to 77, man. Like, you know what I mean? There was no 140 points in the playoff. It was the networks didn't even want to show the games because it was some ugly basketball.
It's just changed so much. And again, it's great having a guy like you on the show and all these former players to talk about their experience and their legacy. And it really does make a difference to the younger generation because they learn a lot. And I feel a lot of the people that watch my show who are younger appreciate this. And I've had, people reach out to me or text me or message me saying, hey, I didn't know about this guy, or I didn't know what this person did. So again, much appreciation for you coming on the show, and we got to do it again for sure.
Absolutely. Anytime, man. Appreciate you. Salute, man.
Appreciate you too. All right, thanks, Dana.
All right. Anytime. Peace.